Thank you for joining the March 2024 VMware TAM customer webinar. This webinar is run by the VMware TAM organization to provide our customers the opportunity to hear great content and interact directly with the brilliant speakers that are delivering it, with the goal of making sure that you are getting full benefit from your software. Please make use of the Q&A feature to ask any questions, and if your question doesn't get addressed today, please be sure to reach out to your TAM and ask them to follow up. Before we get into today's content, there are just a couple of quick announcements. Our next TAM customer webinar will be on April 11th, where we will be reviewing feature capabilities in vSphere and VCF to simplify lifecycle operations. As we mentioned earlier, we do want you to benefit from these sessions by interacting with our speakers. So if you have any questions during today's webinar, please do make use of the Q&A feature and we will address them during the webinar. At the end of today's session, you will be prompted to fill out a simple 2-question survey related to the value that you receive from this session, and to request any future topic suggestions as well. Your completion of the survey is really valuable to us, so we'd appreciate if you could take the time to fill it in. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded and your TAM will be able to make the recording available to you in the coming days. After a few months, the recording will be publicly available on the VMware TAM Services YouTube channel, which you can access from the QR code on screen. And so that brings us to today's speakers and topic. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Rick Walsworth, Product Marketing Director within our VCF division, and also Pete Fletcher and Sabina Anya, VCF Product Marketing Engineers. So over to you guys.
Appreciate it. And thanks for everybody for joining. We were really looking forward to this session. And what we're going to do through this session from an agenda standpoint is really start to walk through essentially kind of the journey we've been on, quite honestly, since going back to 2016, 2017, when VMware Cloud Foundation really came into the market. But more recently, based on the close of the Broadcom acquisition, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually provide an overview on some of the changes that have happened to our portfolio, and then really kind of reinstate our commitment to our customers as part of this new organization. Then what I'll do is I'll actually walk through the platform architecture itself and give you some data points around some of the decisions that you have to make as you're looking at kind of moving into cloud infrastructure, either on-prem or leveraging public cloud infrastructure as a mechanism to be able to deliver infrastructure as a service. I'll go right then into VMware Cloud Foundation. I'll provide an overview, but then I'll jump into the architecture itself and provide the platform benefits of the architecture, just so you understand how this is positioned relative to options you have, for deploying infrastructure in your environments. I'll also talk specifically about some of the add-ons and some of the use cases that are enabled through VMware Cloud Foundation and through those add-ons. And then we'll close with a few resources that you can leverage, as well as some next steps as part of it. As was mentioned in the beginning, we do have some of our esteemed guests and panelists on there, so they're here to answer your questions. We do encourage interaction, and we may take some pauses throughout here to be able to answer questions as you go throughout, but I will save time at the end of this presentation to be able to make sure that your questions are answered as we go forward. So before we get into it, just a little bit about myself. I've actually been at VMware for 5 years. I was hired as the VMware Cloud Foundation product marketing lead back in 2019. So this transition is really validation for some of the strategies we've been building out. And through my career, I've really been through 3 primary waves of technology. The first one was really around broadband, working at startups and delivering, kind of broadband access to businesses, and then actually to the home through cable modems. So, those of you that have cable modems, we were one of the pioneers that did that back in the day. The second wave was cloud, and have obviously been, immersed in cloud, certainly here at VMware, but even at some of the other companies I've worked at as well. And then now, certainly the biggest wave of innovation that's happening is around AI. And so we'll touch on those last 2 waves of innovation and some of the capabilities that it provides, and really start to look at some of the use cases as we go through this presentation today. So let's just start really just by talking about the Broadcom transition, right? We wanted to essentially right up front be able to essentially be very upfront in terms of some of the changes we've made, really just to help you understand why we've made these changes. And as you look at this, how this is going to help you as we go forward, right? So, over the years, and certainly as we were leading up to the close of the Broadcom acquisition, there was a roadshow where, Hock Tan and his leadership team was actually out talking to VMware customers, really just to understand what was working, what wasn't, right? And here's some of the feedback, if I just to summarize some of the feedback we got, through those conversations. First off, that our portfolio was way too complex, right? I mean, and I lived it, right? I lived it for the past 5 years and seen a lot of that. We had complexity as part of that. So you'll see we've made a lot of changes to the portfolio to simplify and really try to take away some of the silos that happened, through the different business units, the different product teams, and how we're actually bringing everything together as a result of it. And as a result, the feedback that if I had to summarize was that the fact that we were difficult to work with, very difficult to be able to understand how to apply the technology into your specific use cases as part of that. And so as a result, really what we've done and our commitment to VMware customers has been to invest for innovation. And so essentially by streamlining our organization, right, all under a single division, the VMware Cloud Foundation division, by doing that, we actually now have these teams that in some cases sometimes even competed with ourselves as different business units because we were operating different product groups, different product markets. Now, by bringing these together, it really gives us the ability to focus on innovation as part of this. And Hock Tan's been very upfront, right? He said he's going to invest $2 billion in the next 2 years in R&D from a VMware standpoint. We are already seeing some of the benefits from that. So as I go through this presentation today, I'll actually share some of the insights, as we're seeing some of these innovations take place and where some of this investment and this focus is really helping us to be able to deliver solutions for our customers. The other thing, and I mentioned this before, is radical simplification. We have taken our portfolio, which if you look at it, there were over 8,900 SKUs within our portfolio, 168 different products and additions and packs. And I mean, we just created all these bundles, but it just created immense complexity. We've gone from 168 products down to really 2 core products, VMware Cloud Foundation, which is going to be our focus today, and VMware vSphere Foundation, which builds upon our leading workload platform and gives customers a path forward to be able to go from that into the into a full stack private cloud environment through VCF. The other thing that's happened as part of this is that it's also given us an opportunity to really branch out. And so the branch out is through a set of add-ons which are actually delivered within the VCF division, but also through some of our partner divisions that have essentially spun out from VMware and as part of Broadcom, but are now different operating divisions within Broadcom. You've got Tanzu, right, as part of the ability to be able to deliver modern apps to the personas that are really trying to build out that modern apps infrastructure. On top of that, we also have an edge group, and we also have the group that's actually providing capabilities for security out across there. Now, we work together, but again, these divisions are really the ability to be able to take these technologies and bring them together as a complete solution as part of it. The third area that you're going to really see benefits from this is really enhanced ecosystems. What had happened over the years is that we had worked with partners and CSPs and it had just become very, very complex. So one of the things that happened, and again, there was a lot of negative press that came out as a result of this, but now that we're on the other side of this, you can hopefully see the benefits of some of these changes that we've made to our partner ecosystem. We've really streamlined our go-to-market partners, essentially inviting all of our channel partners and distributors back into the Broadcom program. But what it does is it gives us immense scale. Now we can start to scale these solutions. Our CSP partners, again, we're still going through a number of the CSP partners as part of bringing them back in under this new organization. But what it's going to do is it's going to give us the ability to be able to scale. And that also includes some of our hyperscale partners, certainly working with AWS and Azure and Google Cloud as part of our hyperscaler environment as a way to be able to provide these ecosystems at scale. And then finally, our OEMs, right? We are essentially still negotiating with some of our OEMs, but our full intent is to bring our OEMs back in under the simplified program with the simplified portfolio as a way to be able to scale our business. So our commitment to you is that we're going to continue to drive this focus, but really use this as a way to be able to deliver business outcomes, which is really the topic of our presentation today. So if I can just spend a little bit of time just kind of walking through what we've heard and certainly what we are seeing as we're doing this, and then provide some guidance in terms of how you do that. And again, as I mentioned in the beginning, I do encourage you to ask questions as we go through this presentation. We're here to be able to answer your questions in real time. So if you just had to take a step back and look at, many times what customers are trying to do with these large digital transformation projects, it's a lot more than just technology. And why a lot of these projects fail is because of the fact that a lot of times they just focus on technology, but they don't take into account the people and the processes get wrapped around it to be able to drive innovation that's going to drive enterprise growth as part of it. So our view is you have to be able to look at this holistically. There's data from McKinsey that says only 30% of these digital transformation projects are successful, right? And so there's a lot of reasons behind it, but one of the biggest reasons behind that failure rate is the fact that I'm carrying a lot of technical debt as part of it. And so, what we're going to walk through here is really the approach and some of your options as a way to be able to do that. And so as many customers looked at this, they looked at the ability to be able to go into public cloud, and public cloud was kind of the easy button that people use as a way to be able to apply this digital transformation and use these technologies. But there's a lot of challenges that happen here, right? You have to look at refactoring, replatforming to go into native public cloud, taking all your applications and essentially try to replatform them to be able to work in this environment. That obviously carries a lot of cost, but also adds a lot of risk, and is one of the reasons why a lot of these programs, fail as they're trying to drive these forward. But even once you get over that hump, you have to look at the economics behind it. And there was a survey by IDC last year that said 64% of the CIOs out there are overspending on their budgets that were already high to begin with. So it's the predictability from a cost standpoint that always comes in when I'm looking at managing public cloud at scale and trying to drive many more workloads into the public cloud as a result. The other side of that is the fact that many times when you're looking at that total cost, 30 to 35% of that cloud spend is going towards wasted cycles where I'm actually having reserved instances that I'm not using, or I have resources that I'm just not applying right. And that comes down to management. How do I manage that infrastructure carefully? And again, a lot of times it's very difficult to do if you've created a shadow IT organization, or you've got developers that are just swiping their credit cards, opening up an account, and essentially doing that. You lose a lot of control, you lose a lot of management mechanism as part of it. So if public cloud, native public cloud isn't the answer for everybody, what are the other options, right? The other option is I can take my existing legacy infrastructure and try to essentially create my own private cloud. And that also carries many challenges from the standpoint of being able to build this out, driving these silos that exist around storage and networking and security and compute. How do I break those silos down? And because the fact that a lot of times you have a lot of inefficiencies that are built through the siloed infrastructure, but you're also spending a lot more of your budget just trying to keep the lights on, right? Just trying to run the business, rather than change the business. And there's a lot of opportunities, I think, to be able to do that. But with this legacy approach, it really becomes very difficult. So it becomes a dilemma, right? How do I modernize? How do I move to be able to drive more applications? How do I drive AI into these systems using either legacy technology or deal with the cost of public cloud? And at the end of the day, it's really about architecture. And, as you look at traditional architectures, they're siloed, right? They're typically using proprietary hardware. You have very limited flexibility. I don't have a lot of APIs that I can leverage. So I have to do a lot of customization of these legacy systems in order to try to bring it up there. But again, going back to what I said in the beginning, if you're not addressing the people and the processes, it's going to be very difficult to be successful in this model. And so we take a page actually from the hyperscalers, right? If you look at how the hyperscalers did this, they actually started day zero with a blank slate. They said, look, rather than using proprietary hardware and building upon that proprietary hardware, I'm going to use standardized x86 hardware infrastructure, right? And I'm going to certainly put all the value, all the differentiation, all the capabilities, I'm going to put that in software because it gives you a lot more flexibility, give you a lot more agility as I can do that. And open up a set of APIs so that now I have the ability to deliver cloud services on-prem or in the cloud as a way to be able to deploy this at scale. And at the end of the day, what this does, this gives you a developer autonomy. Now developers have the ability to be able to build essentially infrastructure as code as they're using this as a way to innovate and continue to drive more innovation, but also drive more revenue because of the services that you're opening up. And so if you look at this infrastructure, right, this platform architecture, I've got a very well-defined infrastructure layer that brings together compute, networking, storage, security, all in a single infrastructure layer, which is now software defined. So it gives me a lot of flexibility in terms of how I can upgrade, how I can apply those changes. To that, I map in an orchestration layer because I want to be able to do things like my day zero stand-up. I want to be able to automate things like provisioning and be able to orchestrate all of these component systems in so that they operate as a single operating system. And then on top of that, I want to be able to deliver an IaaS consumption layer. This consumption layer gives you the ability to be able to essentially deliver more of a services architecture. That services architecture allows developers and data scientists the ability to be able to go in, build their own infrastructure, run their sprints. When they're finished, they can actually destroy the cluster, put those resources back in the pool so that they can be reused. So it really is a very efficient model. Whereas I'm getting, 80, 90% utilization of my infrastructure and have the ability to scale up and scale down as I need to as part of this. And so, keep this in mind as we go through this discussion because you're going to see a lot of similarities on this model in terms of what we've done with VMware Cloud Foundation. And so if you look at this transformation, right, going away from these siloed architectures and moving out across there, Gartner actually just released some data that says that by 2028, so in the next 4 years, more than half of the companies that are using siloed architectures are going to move to a platform architecture. Now, some of this is cloud, right? So they're moving into that cloud infrastructure layer, but it does also provide an opportunity to be able to transform on premises as well, where I now have that very clear infrastructure orchestration and IaaS consumption layer. So Gartner certainly sees this coming. And again, the value that Gartner brings is they spend 80% of their time talking to clients and 20% of their time talking to vendors. So they really do have a sense in terms of the pulse of what is happening within there. And so that's a great setup, I think, for kind of reintroducing VMware Cloud Foundation. We're all familiar with the full stack capabilities of Cloud Foundation, but really what's changed and what I'm going to spend the bulk of our discussion today is talking about some of those changes, talking about this platform architecture and some of the use cases in terms of how it can be applied on-prem, but then also how we're extending that architecture out into cloud environments so that it gives you more of a hybrid cloud environment. So just from a kind of a top level architecture standpoint, if you look at VMware Cloud Foundation, I'll start with the compute side, right? So we're using vSphere obviously as our primary compute engine within that and driving all of the innovation through vSphere, but then also the ability to be able to extend that into storage. So now I have essentially a full stack hyperconverged infrastructure layer that not only brings in compute and storage using vSAN and vVols, so it allows you to be able to bring in third-party storage if I wanted to use external storage as a way to be able to scale out these environments, but it also brings together networking. And software-defined networking, obviously led by NSX, but as I'll explain as we go through this presentation, it's much more than just NSX. When I'm going into a container environments, I now have the ability to extend out and build that out as well. I can also start to look at how am I managing this through my operations layer. So it gives me a very clear dashboard in terms of how are all these infrastructure components working together, and how am I now using this as a way to be able to deliver infrastructure as a service, but doing so at enterprise scale. It also now gives me a orchestration layer. This orchestration layer allows me to be able to take all of my traditional day zero, day one, day two operations in terms of how do I stand up net new infrastructure? How do I provision services as part of that infrastructure? And then how do I maintain that in terms of patches and updates and whatnot? Because, you know, left on its own, if I just deployed these components without that orchestration layer, it becomes very difficult to be able to essentially understand what are the interdependencies out about that. But by automating and orchestrating all of those capabilities, it now allows the IT teams to focus more on innovating for the business rather than just keeping the lights on. And so it really does flip the script in terms of that. But as I mentioned, when we're talking about these platform architectures, the most important thing is how do I enable my developers, my data scientists, my application owners? How am I enabling them now to be able to leverage this underlying infrastructure as a way to build net new services? And so we do this through an IaaS consumption layer. This IaaS consumption surface essentially provides the ability to be able to essentially provide an API-based front end so that developers can go in, they can operate within their own namespace. Now, this namespace gives them the ability, using either VMs or containers under a Kubernetes orchestration, as the ability to be able to build infrastructure as code. So think about that for a second, right? You can now take your developers, which are, many of them are cloud native, and they're used to essentially using declarative syntax and YAML code as a way to build infrastructure. You're now giving them the same tool sets that they have in native cloud, but you're doing so on-prem. And you're also essentially giving them an environment that has all of the guardrails that are set in day one, right? So I can set my storage quotas, I can set my compute environment, I can set all my security and my networking environments. As the IT team, I can set that up so that my developer doesn't have to think about it, right? They can just go in and focus on running their DevOps programs, building code, and then using that code as a way to be able to innovate for the business itself. So the core platform itself, while our focus right now is around private cloud, this extends naturally out into our service provider markets. So if you think about the CSP partners that we have within our portfolio, those can now be enabled using this exact same infrastructure. All opens up opportunities for sovereign cloud. So where you're in secure environments that do have sovereignty requirements for either data locality or data protection, that's all built into it as part of it. But then also now extending out into public cloud through our hyperscaler partners. So Azure, AWS, GCP, we've got the full suite of hyperscaler partners. They actually now can leverage this same infrastructure. And we also are offering license portability, where I can essentially buy a license on premises under VMware Cloud Foundation and then extend that license out into our service provider partners as well as our hyperscaler partners. So we typically see two deployment models where VMware Cloud Foundation is going to be deployed underneath. It's going to be a customer managed environment where essentially the customer becomes their own cloud provider, where they're essentially building this infrastructure as a service, leveraging the automation capabilities, customizing it for their own requirements, and then leveraging this as a infrastructure platform that can deliver net new services to all of the developers, all the app owners within the environment. The other model is a provider managed, right? Where now essentially the service provider builds their infrastructure, leveraging VCF as the core construct of that, and then provides it as a service. So much more as a turnkey service, but allows us now to be able to extend this out into public and partner clouds. Finally, and this is the area I'll cover, towards the end of this discussion today, We do have add-ons, right? And as I mentioned, the add-ons come either through some of our divisions within Broadcom as part of this that partner with a VCF division as part of this. But what it does is it really covers a couple core areas. It covers application networking and security, as well as load balancing. So it gives me the ability to not only establish firewalls and leverage microsegmentation as a core construct for security, but it also gives me the ability to leverage some of the advanced capabilities where I'm now taking advantage of some of the onboard intelligence that's built into it, interacting with our software-defined network layer as a way to be able to establish not only the ability to detect if indeed an anomaly has broken through or something has broken through your network, but also gives you the ability to be able to quarantine those workloads, take forensic, corrective action, and then use that as a way to do that. So that's really coming out of the ANS team, the application network security team, as well as load balancing, leveraging the AVI technology as a way to build that out. On top of that, we also have the advanced Tanzu service. The Tanzu service actually not only provides the ability to take advantage of the embedded Tanzu runtime that we have built into every VCF and every vSphere system has that embedded runtime in terms of Tanzu Kubernetes Grid. But what this does, this maps to it and provides a management and orchestration layer that now provides the ability for the platform teams, the development teams, the DevOps teams. It gives them a developer-friendly interface as a way to be able to not only interact with VMware Cloud Foundation, but gives them the ability to be able to scale these services out across the run. On top of that, we do also have a ransomware and disaster recovery. So this is actually technology that we've integrated within the VCF division, but what it does is it provides real-time disaster recovery using cloud resources as a way to scale, but also provides the ability to be able to leverage this in use cases around ransomware recovery. So in the unlikely event ransomware breaks through your system and they actually, do get in there, the ransomware recovery platform as part of the VCF division gives you the ability to be able to essentially create a isolated recovery environment in the cloud where I can now use that to not only recover systems so that I can essentially take my downtime by as much as 75%. I can reduce that downtime significantly, but it also gives you an environment where if the law enforcement comes in and they want to do forensics around the actual intrusion, this gives you the ability to be able to leverage this as a way to not only recover systems, but also provide an isolated environment to be able to recover that capability. So this is probably one of our hottest selling products right now around our ransomware recovery. And you're going to see some announcements over the next week in terms of some of the ways we're bringing all these capabilities together in much more of a single platform. And, given the fact that we've got the NVIDIA GTC conference coming up next week, we also made announcements last year at VMware Explorer around private AI and what we're doing to be able to help support large language models and generative AI as a construct as I'm building these out. So these private AI services are also an add-on into VMware Cloud Foundation, but this takes advantage of some of the integration we've had with vSphere and VMware Cloud Foundation and NVIDIA for now about going on almost 3 years. And what this does is this takes a GPU and provides the ability to be able to essentially virtualize a GPU, much like I can virtualize compute or network or storage resources today. We're doing the same thing with GPUs. So it allows you not only get better utilization of these very precious, very expensive resources, but it also allows the ability to be able to scale so that now, especially when you're looking at Gen AI and these large language models, the throughput and the workload require actually more than a single GPU can handle. So now it gives me the capability, since I'm virtualizing these GPU resources, I can now actually gang GPUs together as a way to be able to support some of these large language models as I do this. And I'll talk about this a little more as we go forward, but this is another important innovation and another area of investment that we're making as we go forward. Okay, spent a lot of time on this one, but I think this is an important way to be able to set context in terms of what we're doing. So, what do we deliver, right? What are some of the outcomes you can expect as part of this? So, the first one is really modernizing infrastructure, moving to that platform architecture, as I talked about before, where everything is essentially software defined and automated as a way to be able to provide, not only high resilience, but also operations that are very extendable out across a number of different workloads, right? So, while we talked about AI, we talked about containers and Kubernetes, we realize that you probably run your business today on traditional client server architectures, and we're leveraging this platform as a way to be able to customize this. And as I get through the architecture, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how you can customize, how you can make these workloads operate in your own environment. But in order to do so at scale, you have to be able to make sure that you're delivering a true cloud experience for your developers, right? So, what do they expect? They expect everything through APIs. They expect the ability to self-serve so they don't have to open a ticket in order to get resources allocated to them. They want the ability to be able to support this across all applications, but certainly looking at what's coming down the future. AI is a big part of many company strategy, and they're trying to figure out, how do I bring those AI systems back into it? And it almost goes without saying, but you want to be able to make sure that whatever you do is secure and resilient. So we have security built in at every layer of the stack, and I'll talk through that as I go through the architecture. But it's all about prevention, right? Making sure that nothing does get in. If something, and doing so in a way that is reducing risk and providing compliance against whatever regulatory body may be overseeing my business. I always want to be able to make sure that my systems are compliant, but also in the unlikely event that something does break through, how do I recover? Right? What are my mechanisms to recover, and how can I essentially shrink down my, our RTO and RPO in terms of the ability to be able to minimize my downtime in the event at the end of the day. And when you put all three of these together, I'm getting better efficiency. I'm making my developers more efficient, and I'm also delivering better resilience as part of that. We see this as a way to be able to reduce the total cost of ownership. And we've actually have a tool that we use in a lot of our sales campaigns. If you haven't talked with your account team yet, I would highly recommend you do so. It's called VVM, the VMware Value Modeler. And what this does is this actually uses real customer data on the back end as a way to be able to build a financial model. And then it allows us the ability to have a one-on-one conversation with you, enter in data about your specific environment or what you're trying to accomplish, and then we can give you a before and after scenario as part of this. In most cases, we're seeing high degrees of cost of ownership reducing as we deploy these systems. And again, I welcome the opportunity to be able to have that conversation with any of you as you're looking at, as you go forward. So when you're looking at modernizing architecture, this infrastructure and moving really more to that platform architecture, this is all about trying to move away from these siloed architectures and really moving towards a infrastructure that allows you the ability to deploy these at scale and be able to do so in a way that brings all of your teams together. So there's no more, the network team won't talk to the storage team. That goes away, right? And really allows you to focus on innovation by moving compute, storage, and networking into that infrastructure layer, delivering a management and orchestration layer, and then providing the ability for developers to self-serve as they build this out in scale. And so as these developers are essentially doing this, you look at the life cycle that they're running through, right? They need to go through their sprints where they're essentially testing, they're releasing new code, they're deploying the code, operating it. In this environment, because of the fact that it's self-service, and now we have the ability, especially when you bring in some of the Tanzu capabilities, you can deliver applications to market 3 to 5 times faster. This is actually a test that we did and a validation we did with an analyst where they actually showed that we were able to deliver infrastructure 3 to 5 times faster as part of this. You're getting greater developer productivity, and you can actually release code faster. So they're actually much more efficient because we're taking a lot of the friction out of the system. We're removing the ability to be able to do this at scale. And so the final tier is really around, how do I build infrastructure that is risk resilient so I can avoid some of the risk, and how do I build infrastructure that's much more secure? And so, as part of this, it's all about, how do I make sure that my systems are ready to recover, and recovery against a number of different threats, right? It could be a security threat where malware breaks through and I have to recover from ransomware. It could be disaster recovery in terms of, I have a issue at my primary site. I need to fail over. Where can I fail over to? Do I have systems that are ready to be able to spin up so that I can reduce my recovery time as it takes to be able to do so? So recovery is a big part of it, but you also want to be able to make sure that you're doing everything to protect the systems itself so that those events don't happen. Monitoring integrated with a robust security measure is what we use as a way to be able to not only detect these threats, but also isolate those infrastructure segments or those workloads, and to be able to do so in real time. So we're using AI as a way to be able to provide proactive security within the systems as a way to be able to build that out. And then just making sure the stack itself is resilient, right? We're just trying to make sure that we've got high availability built across compute, storage, and networking to be able to make sure that everything from host upgrades to system upgrades, patches, these are all done in a way that's very resilient and gives you the ability to be able to scale this out as part of this. So I see a couple questions come in, and thanks for the questions, Shailesh, as part of this. Tell me more about it's actually VVM, it's a VMware Value Modeler as part of this. So we have a team internally within VMware that they are our cloud economics team. And what they have is they have built a very complex model. If anyone's familiar with DICE, we've used DICE over the years as a way to be able to bring in data from actual deployments. What we do is we build that data together so it's masked, so no one customer's data comes out, but it gives us a lot of intelligence, gives us a lot of information about these systems, and then we use that to run scenarios. These scenarios now provide the ability to be able to deploy this at scale. What I would recommend you do, Shailesh, is reach out to your TAM or your account team and ask about VVM, and they can set up some time one-on-one with your team, with your account team, to be able to go through that modeler. Again, we're right now it's more of a consultative type thing, but again, we're doing it on our dime. There's no cost typically that's involved with it, but it's really to help you understand what the financial value is, and then also how can I essentially present that to your staff, to your team, right? To your management and your execs, in terms of they want to understand what's the TCO reduction and what's my return on investment going to be as part of this. So if you can't find it through your account team, certainly feel free to reach back to the TAM teams, and we can make those introductions to you anytime. But appreciate the question and keep them coming. Okay. So I mentioned Gartner before, and Gartner actually just introduced a new Magic Quadrant. And this Magic Quadrant, what it does is it actually brings in a new construct that they call distributed hybrid infrastructure. And this kind of DHI, this distributed hybrid infrastructure, it really has kind of two modes, right? They looked at it from two mechanisms. They looked at it from cloud going on-prem. So think of an AWS Outpost as a model that would work that way, or they looked at it going on-prem into the cloud. And of this inaugural DHI Magic Quadrant, there were 4 leaders picked out of this: AWS, Oracle, Microsoft, and VMware. And of all of the 4 leaders in this segment, you had Microsoft, AWS, and Oracle as bringing their cloud services on-prem. But VMware was the only one that actually took the approach of bringing an on-prem and then extending that into the cloud. And so as part of this research, and again, this is available if your TAM hasn't shared this with you already, we can certainly provide a link where you can actually download the reprint of this report. And it came in 2 forms. There's a Magic Quadrant, which provides kind of this easy to use view and shows you leaders and challengers and niche players within this market. But it also has a critical capabilities document. I would absolutely recommend you review the critical capabilities document, because what they do is they actually look at 5 different use cases. And across all 5 use cases, VMware was a leader within all of those use cases. So it just shows you the validation, I think, that's coming from industry leaders and analysts such as Gartner as a way to be able to present this. We're very proud of this, but definitely something that I would recommend. If you haven't seen this research, I would definitely recommend you take a closer look at this research. Since we're talking about analysts, the other thing we've done is we actually worked with Forrester, and Forrester, and again, this is about 2 years old, but the data is still very, very relevant. And they do a study called a total economic impact. And the total economic impact is actually a financial study where what they do is they actually interview a number of customers, and then they build a composite model, and then they run a ROI study against that composite model. Within this, what it does is it looks at the different savings and the areas of savings. And what was kind of surprising coming out of this, as they did this for Cloud Foundation, they looked at a security savings of 50% around firewall and threat protection. So that was really a big savings area around that. They looked at 30% of that savings. If I look at 171% ROI and a 9-month payback, 30% of that savings is really coming through operational savings. So this is a lot of the automation and orchestration that I talked about. That's actually taking cost out of your operating model and allowing you to apply it back to the business. And then 20% of the cost savings came from network operation savings. So the ability to be able to virtualize my network now gives me the ability to scale these systems, but to be able to, again, take a lot of cost out of the equation. I did see a question that came in, I'm not sure if it was answered, about the Gartner data. So Gartner is, last year, 2023 was the first year they ran this DHI study that I talked about before. What's happening now is there will be a new DHI coming out here. We probably won't see it until September or October, which is when it was released last year. But again, they are planning to continue that Magic Quadrant. So great question. Another point I'll share here is that we are right now in the midst of what's called a business validation study with IDC, where again, they do the same thing. They interview a handful of customers. We're actually, I think, targeting 10 customers with this IDC study, and you should see this a little bit later this year that does provide updated information and different models as part of that. Okay, that's enough on the intro. Now what I want to do is I want to transition into the VCF architecture and platform benefits. Before I do so, Pete or Sabina, were there any questions that we hadn't answered that we want to raise up to the top?
So far, so good. You've got them
Okay,
all.
we're good. All right, great. And again, I encourage you to keep the questions coming. We're here to be able to do that. Let's see, Nick, good question. Keeping in mind that the recent acquisition of the ESC business unit, how's Horizon VDI integrated into these bundles going forward, and how are customers doing that? Okay, so from Horizon standpoint, Horizon was a workload. It's always been a workload in terms of looking at VDI solutions in a VCF environment. So this is something that we've always done. We've treated it as a workload. And even though that's spun off as a different business, that doesn't change. We still see VDI as a core use case, and we see Horizon as a platform that we will continue to integrate with as we go forward. So I don't expect any changes in that, because the requirements for the workload are not going away, and our requirements to be able to support Horizon as a platform doesn't go away either. What may change, we did have some embedded components. So we did have some of the Workspace ONE components built into the product. They still exist today, so there's been no changes there. Over time, though, we'll see what happens in terms of that. But in terms of looking at Horizon VDI, this is something that we continue to support as a core use case in a VMware Cloud Foundation environment. But great question, Nick. I appreciate that. Okay, so let's kind of double click now and start to look at the components of VMware Cloud Foundation and look at how we're bringing these together. Because as I mentioned before, it would be easy to just be able to say, here's a BOM, here's a set of parts, you build it yourself. And that was kind of how Cloud Foundation started, to be honest, back even 2016 timeframe when it was first introduced. And as a surprise, it didn't work well, right? Where we essentially just asked our customers to be the system integrator to be able to build all this together. And so what's changed over the past 6-7 years since then is we've now really built this into a single product. and again, with this new renewed focus and the single VCF division, we're now, really accelerating, I think, some of that capability as part of that. The SDC Manager is really kind of the core construct to it. So SDC Manager is a piece of software, a software module that runs within VMware Cloud Foundation. And its sole purpose is essentially orchestrating and automating all of the full stack. So it brings in the ability to be able to provide provisioning and scale. It automates a lot of the day 0 to day 2 operations, and it provides the ability to be able to automate and patch these systems. Now, what's happening is that you're actually starting to see, tighter integration between SDC Manager, between ARIA, and certainly between what's happening out across the other components of the platform. So that's one of the things you can look forward to as we continue to grow this out. The other area obviously is vSphere, right? vSphere is the core workload platform, and we use that as a way to be able to essentially have workloads supported out across there using either VMs, using containers, or using AI as a core workload construct. And then what we do is we essentially bring that in with vSAN and vVols, NSX as a way to be able to scale that out from a networking standpoint. And then, as I mentioned, every vSphere and every VCF system that ships, and it has been for several years now, has an embedded Kubernetes runtime. This Kubernetes runtime is conformant with the upstream systems and does provide the ability to be able to run both VMs and containers under a Kubernetes orchestration framework. Also provides developer-ready infrastructure, right? So now I have infrastructure that's essentially ready to scale and automate, right? So it gives me the ability to automate a lot of these capabilities using Kubernetes as a core construct as I'm building this out, but then leveraging the networking, storage, and compute aspects as we bring these systems together. And then under ARIA or vRealize, we have the ability to be able to build out a cloud management infrastructure that not only provides capacity and performance management, but also does a lot of logging and monitoring of those systems to be able to provide self-service automation and much better visibility into the systems. So this is when you look at VMware Cloud Foundation, this is essentially what's within the bill of materials of Cloud Foundation. And as I mentioned before, kind of the day 0 to day 2 operations become very important, right? Because of the fact that as I'm standing up net new infrastructure, or as I'm scaling infrastructure as a way to be able to do this, automation takes a lot of those manual steps out. We actually had a third party come in and actually run a test side by side in terms of what it takes to stand up net new infrastructure with bare metal and what it takes to be able to do so under a VCF environment. And it really reduced the time down. I mean, we went down from, in some cases, it took days to stand up net new infrastructure, where now I can automate that. I can do that in a matter of hours. It takes a little bit of time up front in order to, build out the models and be able to essentially build out the configurator as a way to do that. But once you make that investment up front, it gives you the ability to deploy these systems at scale in an automated fashion. We have a number of our customers, by the way, especially in the financial services segment, that actually have no manual steps within their operations. So they've taken the automation that comes out of the box with Cloud Foundation, and they've actually built their own automation on top of that allows the ability to be able to integrate with third-party automation platforms, or if they wanted to build it themselves, they can build it themselves. But again, we provide the APIs that give you the ability to be able to do that at scale. Day 1, the provisioning of workload domains on demand. So workload domains are the construct in terms of how we build out and add workloads into the environment. These are purpose-built, and they're very, very scalable for supporting both traditional applications as well as modern apps. And certainly as we talk about AI a little bit later in this presentation, you'll see how those workload domains become that kind of central point for being able to deploy workloads at scale. And then a lot of times people overlook what it takes to maintain these systems, especially now where you have a growing number of security threats. And it's more and more important to be able to make sure that your systems are patched and updated to be able to, respond to any of these latest changes, or quite honestly, to add a lot of the innovation that we're delivering in the platform. How can I now do this at scale? So now the ability to be able to automate this day two operations is very important as I'm looking at how do I scale these systems out. And let me just walk through a quick example, just so you get a better understanding of how these work, right? So if I look at the components of my software-defined data center in terms of I'm bringing in NSX and vSAN and ESX, with my management construct, these all operate at different and release on different schedules, at least have in the past. And what we're doing today, under the new VCF division is everything is going to release under a single at the same time. So you don't need the dependencies, but what you do need is the ability to be able to have a LCM engine that automates a lot of the steps necessary to be able to bring these systems up to date to the latest security fixes, or even to the latest releases as they come through there. So this automation becomes very important because it gives me the ability to not only take my management domain, which is kind of the core management construct within the architecture, but also allows me to be able to update these workload domains pretty much on your schedule. So you can update the management domain first, and then as you get maintenance windows, you could independently update the workload domains, or I can actually go all the way in to a single cluster and update the cluster on its own. So it gives you the ability to be able to do so. And so what this looks like is that we will update and release a net new bundle. And then the admins will get a notification that this bundle is available, and I can now go ahead and apply those updates. I can review the updates against my best practices, against my security advisories. I can review it against whatever I'm using from the standpoint to ensure my systems are compliant and that I'm updating that. And then again, I can schedule these updates all the way down to the resolution of a single cluster. So it gives you a lot of flexibility, a lot of power in terms of how you want to be able to schedule these systems. I have a full monitoring and reporting framework built in so that I get an audit trail at the end of this when I know when these systems are updated. And again, if I'm ever audited, I now have a paper trail, so to speak, in terms of when these systems were updated. So that, again, I can prove to any compliance board or any audit that my systems are updated against any threats that may come within the environment. So if you think about all of these steps and what I just walked through on this automated fashion, doing this on your own, right? So if I deployed NSX, vSAN, vSphere, and ARIA on their own without this capability, I become, as the admin, I become the one that has to track all this. And so I have to do all these in very different steps, which is really one of the reasons why we automated a lot of these capabilities as part of this. So this is really a core differentiator for the platform and something that we use as a way to be able to build this out. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to provide a quick overview on each of these component products within VCF, just to talk about some of the latest innovations, and certainly give you a glimpse of what's coming as part of this. So everybody knows vSphere, right? So vSphere is kind of the premier workload platform as we've grown this out. And really what's come into vSphere over the past release. So if you look at vSphere 8U2, which is our current shipping release, we do have, this kind of efficiency that's built into it to be able to improve productivity of the IT teams, and really by centralizing a lot of the management and really trying to streamline a lot of the LCM capabilities that are built within the vSphere framework, and then we extend that up into the VCF framework under SDDC Manager. Workload performance. So this is really where a lot of the innovations taking place. What we've done is we've actually doubled the number of GPUs and virtual GPUs that are supported per VM. Previous to this release, we could actually support a single VM could support up to 8 GPUs. We've now doubled that capacity. So now I can support 16 physical or virtual GPUs into a single VM. So now think about the use case here, right? The use case that I've got is I want to be able to run a large language model where I have essentially the ability to be able to support, with these very large VMs, I want to be able to support the throughput of these large language models. Previously, I would have to break that up and to be able to carve that out so that I can essentially reach the capacity of a single GPU. But now if I can gang these GPUs up and essentially have a virtual GPU, which gives you the performance of the physical GPU, but now gives me the ability to be able to gang these together, I can now support these large language models under generative AI as a way to be able to support these larger infrastructures. But the other,
Before
yes.
we go ahead, we have a question in the chat that I actually find very interesting, and I know it's on a lot of customers' minds and a lot of people's minds as well. The question is, how mature is LCM compared to the other two? So Jason is asking, we've seen mixed results from both ARIA LCM and vSphere LCM, and I know there's a general concern of how much value can you derive from LCM, how important it is as part of the platform. Can you help articulate that?
Yeah, absolutely. So great. Thank you for pointing that out, Sabina, and thanks, Jason, for the question. So yeah, I mean, LCM has been, and I'll be completely honest, right? For those of you that have experienced, kind of over the past, let's say 2 years ago, 3 years ago, yeah, there were some challenges in orchestrating all this LCM. What's happened over the past 2 years, we have put immense focus from an R&D standpoint into making sure that we're hardening that LCM process and that LCM engine as a way to be able to do so. So if you look at where we're at today, so our latest go-to release is 5.1, 5.1. Even in 5.0, when we went from 4.5 into 5.0, we made immense updates to that LCM engine, and we did so at the cost of new features, right? We deferred new features on the VCF platform to be able to put more focus on that. Couple things that you'll see as a result of that, Jason. You're going to see higher throughput as part of it, because now what we've done is we parallelize a lot of tasks, and there's a lot more pre-checks in it. And that's something that's unique to the VCF LCM versus what you may have in ARIA or vSphere as part of that. And what the pre-checks do is they actually look at the environment before you start the operation. They'll actually go through the system itself to be able to make sure that I've essentially created a system that's ready to be able to instantiate that LCM operation before you do it. And so what you'll see as a result, you'll see a couple things. The parallelization actually reduces the time about 30% from what it took me to do that, to do a LCM operation before, to what it took me to do that in the 5.0 timeframe. So you're going to see a lot faster operations, and these operations complete in much shorter time. The other thing you're going to see is much more reliability and much fewer halts. What would happen in the past is that we would run through an LCM operation and it would run into an anomaly. It would find something that just wasn't expected or wasn't within compliance in terms of the specifications that we asked for when we operate LCM. So what would happen is that it would halt, and then you'd have to troubleshoot it. So two things came out of that as a result. One thing is the pre-checks actually do find a lot of these issues up front and actually gives you guidance. It actually is very prescriptive in terms of look at the configuration on this host. So it gives you the ability, and very prescriptive in terms of doing that before you initiate that LCM operation. But the other thing it does is that if indeed it's running through an operation and it finds an anomaly, it'll just bring that aside and essentially give you the ability to go and follow up on it. So you're going to see much faster operations from an LCM standpoint under SDC manager control. But the other thing you're going to see is much more reliable operations and the ability to be able to do the pre-checks to be able to make sure everything's compliant before you start. But once you do start, if you run into an issue that isn't a P0 issue, it'll move that aside, it'll complete the operation, and then give you the ability to go back and address the issue and then complete the operation there. So, we actually have an environment that we have called Holodeck, which is essentially a single server nested VCF environment. I know a lot of our TAMs have taken advantage of this. I highly encourage you that if you want to learn more about how that SDC operation works, I would definitely encourage you to take a look at that. But Sabina, thanks for bringing that up, and thanks again for the question. Okay, Kind of last tier here that I'll talk about is really how are we trying to accelerate innovation for our DevOps teams? And this is really about leveraging that embedded Kubernetes runtime that I mentioned before as a way to be able to scale these systems, but then also now to extend out to that broader ecosystem. Leverage, the Tanzu capabilities, leverage some of the virtual GPU capabilities, not only with NVIDIA, which has obviously been our partner, but as we look at private AI, we've also made announcements with Intel and IBM in terms of extending that out across different architectures in these DevOps environments. Let's switch now, talk a little bit about storage and how kind of what we've done around ESA and certainly give you some insight in terms of what's coming. So, anybody that's deployed vSAN in the past has, typically deployed on the original storage architecture, which, essentially use dedicated cache and accommodate, a lot of the older storage devices in there. But the feedback we were getting very strong was that really needed to optimize for express storage architectures. And that's really where ESA came in, and it's a much more flexible architecture. It started with vSAN 8, so this is something that came as part of the vSAN 8 release, but it does allow you now to be able to optimize for these new NVMe-based flash systems. We've removed the concept of the disk group, so it gives you the ability to leverage all the devices out across there. And then now as you look at these extended capabilities, right, it gives you the ability to disaggregate storage. I can grow storage independent of compute, so I no longer have to have a one-for-one relationship. I can actually scale out my storage systems as part of that. So these are some of the innovations we brought into vSAN. But remember, as I said in the beginning, when you're looking at storage architectures, vSAN is obviously required in the management domain, but for workload domains, you have a choice, right? You can deploy standard vSAN operations. I can actually leverage vVols as a way to be able to use vVol compliant external storage from all of the leading vendors as a way to be able to do so, or I can use standard VMFS on Fiber Channel or NFS systems as a way to do so. Now, what this chart does is it really provides a little bit of visibility in terms of what you get, with vSAN, what you get with vVols as part of that. So I'm still getting the storage-based policy management, the automation, and the remote clusters. But what I lose is some of the other capabilities. I lose the ability to update and patch those systems because I can't update a external storage array through vVols, or I can't have compute only clusters as I can as part of that. So right now the capabilities are somewhat limited, but we do have many customers that are using external storage in VCF environments, and we do support these out at scale. I will note here, just for anyone that's interested, right now, we only support the original storage architecture for stretch clusters, but we do have a release that is coming that will extend that out, and you'll be able to support stretch clusters with ESA as well in these environments. All right, let's talk quickly about
Before
networking.
we do that, hold on. Before we
Yes.
do that, we have
Okay.
another question that I think it would be interesting because it's also related a little bit to a roadmap item. So we have Nick on chat asking us about how do we treat security advisories and how will patches be applied when you want to do rapid remediation of different issues? And I think this is a good opportunity to call out the asynchronous patching and how we're going to integrate that going forward. I know it's not necessarily related to storage, but I think it's a good question to answer.
Oh, great call out, and thanks for the question, Nick. So so essentially, we have a team that essentially they are always looking at the VSAs and what our response to those VSAs are. And one of the things we learned, certainly over the past couple of years, is that the ability to have to force an update to the full stack was just a big heavy lift, and it took us a while to get the patches out that were ready for it. And so what we created was something we call the async patch tool. What the async patch tool, and it runs actually outside of SCC Manager today, but we are bringing that in over time, so that will be actually part of that, is this gives you the ability to asynchronously patch any one of the components or all of the components within a VCF system without having to do a full LCM operation. our customers love this. As a matter of fact, the feedback we've gotten through some of the CTABs has been, let's integrate this async patching capability into the product itself. So the async patch tool, again, if you're not familiar with it, you haven't seen it, would highly recommend you reach out to your TAMs and your account teams to get a little more information on it. But this is something that right now it runs asynchronous to the SDC manager operation, but over time you're going to start to see these brought together. And really, our outcome is to be able to make sure that you can address day zero issues on day zero, right? We'll try to make sure that as soon as a patch is ready, that you can apply those patches to, let's say, vCenter or vSphere, or if it's, the entire stack, you can apply the patch to the entire stack as well. So it gives you a lot better, more choice, but it gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of how you can do that. So thanks for the question. Keep them coming. All right. Let's talk a little bit about networking. And again, when people think of software-defined networking and VCF, they really think of NSX. And obviously NSX is a core part of that, provides the ability to be able to, have, leverage your existing physical network and provide distributed switching and routing as part of it, with consistency as part of that site. But that's really only part of our overall networking story, right? Because now when you're talking about bringing in for modern apps, I bring in Ontria. And now I have Ontria as a way to be able to simplify from a Kubernetes standpoint, the construct of bringing all these containers in with a consistent comprehensive network policy model that gives me the ability to support containers and Kubernetes within these environments very easily, but also integrate with the upper level NSX manager so that it operates as a single system. ARIA operations for networks, previously known as Verni, is one of our most popular tools because it provides very powerful monitoring, but also gives you the ability to be a little more predictive and run some what-if scenarios through this pre-deployment assessment as part of it. It does application discovery, so it gives me a complete network map of what it all looks like, and then use the topology and the visualization as a way to be able to predict that. And then HCX has been our hybrid cloud, data mobility model where you can go any to any. So customers use this for migrations. They use this for data center evacuations, but it gives you that ability to be able to do so with zero downtime, right? Which is very, very important when you're looking at these migrations. So again, our portfolio of networking, and again, just to reemphasize, these are all part of what you get within a VCF environment. Virtual GPU. So I've spoke to this a couple times, but I wanted to really double click on what this is. This is technology that's been around since 2022, I think is when we did our first release on 4.4 with these virtual GPUs, and even earlier on the vSphere side. But what this does is this allows us to be able to take a single physical GPU and essentially share it. Right now, I can essentially treat a GPU like I've treated memory and CPUs and compute resources for 2 decades. So we're using a lot of those same constructs, but now allows me the ability to take these very expensive, very important resources, and now I can get higher utilization out as part of this. It avoids a lot of wasted GPU cycles, and I'm getting higher utilization. Because the problem we heard, and we heard this from a number of customers, and NVIDIA was, worked with us to try to solve this, is that, most customers were dedicating GPUs to data scientists, but they were getting utilized 20, 25, 30%. So they weren't really getting utilization of this. This allows us to really crank up that utilization and allows us now to be able to scale this out. We can also leverage a lot of the constructs that you've grown to love with vSphere, right? I can use vMotion. I can use DRS as a way to not only initially place the workloads, but I can also use it as a way to load balance these workloads out across here. But that physical GPU integration was really only part of the story. The other thing we've done is we've taken a lot of the innovation built into the VCF platform, certainly around leveraging containers and VMs, and we've also integrated it into the NVIDIA AI Enterprise Suite. So what this does is this now provides a complete top to bottom solution from the physical GPUs through the infrastructure layer, all the orchestration automation, that self-service interface that I talked about through the cloud consumption surface, and then integrates that with a software suite that NVIDIA provides to be able to help training and instantiation of these services out across there. And so this becomes the basis for what we're using around our private AI solution that was introduced last year. And so you'll see actually at GTC next week, you'll see some additional announcements around this. But what this does is this now takes this integration work that I talked about before at the infrastructure layer and also the integration at the AI enterprise suite, and now allows you to work with a number of different third-party large language model instances. So now I can build generative AI supported systems leveraging this integration as a way to be able to take advantage of all the capabilities I've built into it. But it also now allows me to tie into a vector database, which now takes advantage of some of the data service capabilities we've built within VCF as a way to expose these out there, provide a self-service interface so that now data scientists don't have to talk to the IT teams as a way to be able to build these systems. They operate in their own environment. And it gives you a lot more GPU visibility. I now have built within the GPUs themselves the ability to be able to scale these systems out as part of this as we go forward. So Thomas, yeah. So Thomas, great question on VCD. So I'm just going to take a pause here and answer Thomas's question on VCD. So vCloud Director, so what we've done, two things, right? We've brought vCloud Director or VMware Cloud Director in under the VCF engineering team. So now we have a single VCF engineering team that's managing that as part of it. But the other thing we've done is we've really segmented this vCloud Director, at least that functionality itself, for the cloud service provider. So this is something that will be CSP enabled as part of cloud service provider bringing this in. But every time we do a release to VCF, vCloud Director will be part of that release. But what we're also doing is we're taking some of the multi-tenancy capabilities, which I know we have a number of enterprise customers that used vCloud Director as a multi-tenant interface. We're taking some of those multi-tenancy interfaces and then building that natively into VMware Cloud Foundation. So that's something that you'll see more on as we go forward. But again, VMware Cloud Director, what you're going to expect to see is much more focus on VCD as part of the VCF stack. And again, because of the fact the engineering teams have been integrated, you're actually going to see faster innovation on that as well as bring some of those capabilities onto the core VCF platform. Okay, switching gears here. I'm just checking time, just to make sure we're still on time here. I've talked about GPUs. The other thing that was a recent innovation are DPUs. These are data processing units, which or otherwise known as smart NICs, that are essentially offload services. And what these offload services do, it gives you the ability to take functions like networking and security, and I can take that off of the primary CPU, and now I can start to run these in an accelerated fashion out across there. So when you're thinking about supporting heavy workloads or advanced deep processing as part of this Project Monterey, as it was known when it was first announced, gives you the ability now to be able to support these out on a very scalable basis. We're right now in trials with a number of large customers as a way to be able to use DPUs as a way to be able to do that. So whether you're trying to offload with the GPUs or offload with DPUs, what we're doing is we're building within VCF the ability to be able to support these as a native part of the infrastructure. So you'll see it, you'll be able to manage it as we go forward. So again, look for more innovation on this side, but DPUs are still an important part of VMware strategy as we go forward. Okay, last couple topics here before we wrap up. We do get a lot of questions around edge, right? Around how can I extend beyond my primary center and how can I extend out across a number of edge sites? And so for some time now, we've supported a capability within VMware Cloud Foundation called remote clusters. And we've got a lot of our customers in kind of the retail space and banking that are really looking to take advantage of this capability, because what this avoids, in this little diagram I have here, this avoids having to stand up separate instances out across here that have to be managed, individually. What we can do is we actually use our central data center here almost as a hub, and then each of these remote sites are spokes where we're now running workload domains out, or several workload domains clusters out across these different remote sites. Now, what it does is it has a central management. So all of my management in terms of automation, LCM, that's all centrally managed. So I can deploy these systems really with no technical personnel required out at these remote sites. So it gives me the ability to push my compute power, my networking, my full stack capabilities out much closer to these edges, and gives them the ability, whether it's a remote office or it's in actual edge location, gives us the ability to be able to do so, using only a 3-node cluster. So even though it is a 3-node cluster, it does give you that full stack compute power much closer to those environments. And what we've actually found as our customers continue to deploy these solutions, those requirements have grown. So we've actually now expanded the top end of it. The bottom end is three nodes, as I mentioned. I can actually now scale those up to 16 nodes out at these remote sites. So what that tells us is that customers are taking advantage of this capability, but they're also pushing more horsepower out to these remote sites. And just to take a look at some of the characteristics here, one of the things we do require is at least a 10 megabit bandwidth connection out across there. And it's not so much a distance limitation as a latency limitation, right? So if let's say I'm doing WAN optimization out across there, I can run these across very long distances as long as I'm maintaining that 50 millisecond of latency requirement that I have within it. And it now gives me the ability to be able to go across distance, again, without having to extend personnel out to those remote sites. Those remote sites can be managed through the central location. So essentially, I can just stand up a small cluster and essentially just use that for compute, storage, and networking out across there. But I get all of the L4 through L7 capabilities built into it, because all of the encryption, microsegmentation, that's all happening now out at these remote sites and across the WAN connection itself. So it gives you the ability to be able to take this core data center construct, but now extend the workload domains out across there. So something, again, you'll see more about, because we're continuing to innovate on this, but you're going to see more about these configurations. Okay, let's now kind of, last topic here. I see, okay, no open questions. So good, we're good there. Thanks, Sabina and Pete, for answering all the questions. Let's talk a little bit about the add-ons, right? So I mentioned these in the beginning, but I wanted to provide a little more detail, a little more context around what these add-ons are and where some of the use cases that these add-ons open up as part of it. So as I mentioned, Private AI Foundation, something we announced at Explore last year, initially with NVIDIA, but then extended it when we went to Barcelona, extended it into Intel as well as to IBM at the same time. And this is really going after that Gen AI use case, right? So going after the ability to support these. You'll see some announcements at GTC next week. So again, all I can say there is stay tuned for it. But the whole idea is to be able to offer a full turnkey solution to be able to support these generative AI use cases, but to be able to do so without exposing your intellectual property out into those environments. Application platform, application security. This is really where the Tanzu portfolio fits in. And again, you see a lot of benefits really towards that developer or the DevOps team or the platform teams that are responsible for maintaining these systems. They can take full advantage of the management, orchestration, visibility capabilities that are provided through Tanzu as part of that. And then application security and load balancing. So this is where we're providing not only the firewall capabilities, but some of the advanced threat protection capabilities that are native to that. These are now available as add-ons into a VCF environment and fit very nicely with that strategy. But then we've also brought in load balancing as part of this. So we're using technology from the Avi acquisition a few years back as a way to have that as part of our total integrated story around building out application security. And then again, a use case that I've mentioned before is a ransomware and disaster recovery. So, provides a comprehensive set of DR and ransomware recovery tools. But, at the outcome, you're seeing much faster downtime resolution. So again, been measured. We did an analysis on this, about a 75% reduction in downtime in response to a ransomware event, which is huge, right? You think about what what the cost, not only from a financial standpoint, but just from a reputation standpoint. If your systems are down and customers are trying to access their systems, if I can get those systems up 75% faster, that's even better. So it gives you the ability to not only protect, but also recover in the event of those failures. And so
Before we move to the use
yeah,
cases, and actually probably a timely moment for this, we have a question around migration from existing running infrastructure. Like if you have the multiple components, vSphere, VROps, and then you have to move to VCF. How do we envision that as a customer journey? Maybe it's a question we should answer for the entire group.
Yeah, no, so great question, and thanks for pointing that out, Sabina. So yes, and that has been always I'll just say a challenge when customers, let's say they've deployed vSphere or vSphere and vSAN, but then they want to migrate those systems, those workloads, all my configurations, all my vCenter profiles. I want to migrate that over into a VCF environment. Today, that is it's a professional services engagement because it is a migration, right? Where essentially what I do is I will essentially evacuate the host, back everything up, evacuate the host, migrate the workloads, and then bring it back under control under SCC Manager. So again, we've gotten very good at it. It's something that happens, but it is still an extra step that a lot of our customers have to take, and it is a professional services engagement as part of it. I can't go too much into roadmap, but I'll just give the viewers here some visibility in terms of what's coming and just to kind of things to look out for. And so the ability to be able to take an existing environment, where I have my vSAN, vSphere, let's say I've got NSX, I might even have ARIA in there as well. What can I do to be able to essentially ingest those environments in underneath of SDC Manager control, but still keep all of my profiles, keep all of my configurations, not have to take workloads offline. These are all important aspects that it takes to be able to run a business as part of it. So, as I mentioned before, as we're kind of accelerating our development engine and accelerating our R&D with some of the investment that Broadcom's put into this, that's one of the things that you're actually going to see coming this year is the ability to be able to ingest those requirements. So what it does is it takes those existing configurations, existing workloads, and it allows you now to be able to essentially bring those in underneath SDC Manager control without having to do a lot of downtime, without having to do a lot of reconfiguration, and avoiding that professional services migration requirement as part of it. So really why we're prioritizing this and why this is so important, because it is really a way to be able to bring those systems in under SDC Manager and allow our customers to really take advantage of some of these use cases I'm going to talk about now. So that's about all I can share right now. All I can say is that stay tuned, stay close to your TAMs as part of that. And as more information becomes available, we'll share it through the TAM community to be able to make sure that you're all aware of what we're doing from not only from that capability, but also some of the other areas where we're making big investments from an R&D standpoint to be able to accelerate innovation. Okay, just in the time we have left here, I do want to cover some of the use cases. So again, kind of following along some of the same tiers I talked about before. And what's different about these use cases now is that, as you have a discussion with your TAM and with your SE and with your account teams, the use cases they're talking about, we kind of have 9 that are articulated here. These not only are kind of marketing use cases, but these also map down through the entire organization. So what we've done is we've reoriented our professional services teams, our technical marketing teams, our architects, everybody that's involved with deploying these use cases out across there is working on these 9 use cases as we deploy these out across these 3 vectors. And it's the ability to be able to modernize, build a IaaS infrastructure leveraging a self-service catalog, extending data center into the cloud. So this is now the hybrid cloud model. And I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. For developers, right? How do I essentially enable my team to develop and deploy infrastructure as code, right? So there's a whole set of validated solutions and reference architectures you'll see around that. How do I implement private AI, the use case I just talked about there? So we're actually building out infrastructure and use cases as a way to be able to do exactly that. How can I run business critical applications within my environment? So what are the best practices? What are the professional services get wrapped around it? And then around security and resilience, ransomware protection, right? How do I stand up a net new ransomware protection environment? How do I modernize my DR environment? How do I bring and integrate security and compliance into this? So this is something you're going to see a lot more on. And certainly as we start to enable TAMs to be able to speak to these, you're going to see a lot more information. And I recommend you work with your TAM teams as a way to be able to build this out. But I talked about hybrid cloud, and I wanted to use this as a way to be able to kind of do a little bit of a wrap up here, but talk about some of the areas where now we're extending this out across there. So one of the things that, we announced as part of kind of this transformation under Broadcom, and now as part of VMware by Broadcom, is the ability to be able to have license portability. And license portability is a way to be able to take let's say I purchased 1,000 cores of VMware Cloud Foundation, and I'm operating on a 3-year subscription under those 1,000 cores. But let's say after year 2, I want to take 200 of those cores and I want to move them over to my favorite hyperscaler. So what this allows you to do without having to redeploy, without having to repurchase, I can actually now take those cores and I can now start to use those cores in any one of the supported hyperscaler or CSP environments. Right now, we've done announcements with Google Cloud as part of this. So GCVE is the first supported environment where they're actually going to run a VCF instance and support the ability to bring VCF licenses into a Google Cloud environment. We expect that we're going to extend that to the rest of our hyperscalers as well as our CSPs as well. So what this provides for you, this provides actually investment protection, right? So even though I bought those 1,000 cores, and let's say I only used 800 of those cores, I still have 200 cores left to deploy. I can decide whether I want to deploy those cores on-prem or whether I want to deploy those in my favorite supported hyperscaler out as part of that. So it gives you a lot of flexibility. And this just is not only the core VCF platform, this also extends out to the add-ons as well. So let's say I brought ransomware recovery in as part of it, and I want to use ransomware recovery in as part of the service. Those are also extensible into supporting in these cloud environments. So license portability is an important part of what we're doing. And then finally, our services portfolio here, we've completely revamped our services, everything from our activation and upgrade support. So many of you may have seen this referred to before as SRE or SRE Essentials. This is essentially our capabilities that we're building into the product. So these are essentially hooks we're building into the product that help you from the standpoint of activation and upgrade, where we've got a team that essentially follows the sun and does provide support for initial system activation, but then also upgrades as part of it. And again, this is something that's embedded within the product and being extended out through a set of services on top of that. We've got our ongoing operations. So obviously, this is where the TAM team comes in and working very closely with the TAM teams as we do that. And then our extended expert teams as part of it. And then our professional cloud services. So as I mentioned before, we're taking a very different approach. We're taking much more of a use case based approach that gives us the ability to build these standardized models, which are field tested and deploy at scale architectures as a way to be able to do this for your environments. Again, with the intent of making sure that your use cases, and we've adapted these pro cloud services as a way to deploy these at scale for your own environments. Okay, last slide, I promise. We have essentially, in terms of next steps, if you want to learn more, certainly, work with your TAM, work with your account rep to be able to get an EBC on the schedule and could be able to double click and go into any areas one-on-one with the account teams and with our product experts. The financial impact analysis. So this was the VVM tool that I talked about before. Highly recommend you take advantage of that because it does provide not only a lot of insight in terms of what's the value that's provided, but also how can I extend this out across there. And then obviously our advisory services are there to be able to help support you on your journey as you go forward. So I want to thank all of you for joining as part of this. I want to thank the TAM community for inviting me in for this presentation. I hope this was useful for you. Again, hopefully this is only the beginning of these conversations. And then finally, I want to thank both Pete and Sabina for answering your questions as they came in. So I don't know if there's anything, Ami, you want to do from a wrap-up standpoint, but this is all of the content I had to share today.
Yeah, thank you so much for today's session, Rick. It's been great to hear all about the value and the power of the VCF platform. So hopefully that gives a lot of encouragement for our customers. And thank you, Pete and Sabina, for joining and for your support on the Q&A. Thank you to everyone who's joined as well. As we mentioned at the beginning, this presentation has been recorded and your TAM will be able to make that available to you. Please join us next month on April 11th when we'll be looking at simplifying vSphere and VCF lifecycle operations. We look forward to seeing you then. Thanks, everyone.